The house stood quietly at the end of the gravel road, surrounded by tall grass that danced whenever the wind passed through. For as long as she could remember, the place had been home to her family. It was old, older than anyone could say for sure, and full of memories that clung to the walls like the scent of pine and dust. After her parents passed away, she had been left with the house. For months she avoided going back. The thought of walking through the creaky rooms alone made her chest tighten. But one afternoon, as the late sun painted the sky with orange and gold, she finally decided to return. When she unlocked the door, a soft sound echoed through the empty rooms, the same familiar sound she had grown up hearing as a child. Every corner seemed to whisper fragments of the past. She could almost hear her mother's laughter from the kitchen, her father's steady voice humming a tune while fixing something near the window. She stood in the living room, looking around at the faded wallpaper and the old wooden floorboards that groaned under her feet. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She decided right then that she would fix it, restore it, not sell it. The idea of letting strangers tear it down felt wrong. This house had seen too much love and loss to end like that, so she made plans. She contacted a local renovation crew to help her with the repairs. It would be a big project, new flooring, plumbing, the works, but she didn't care about the cost. She wanted to keep her parents' memory alive through the home they had built together. When the workers arrived a few weeks later, she watched as they carefully began the process. Dust filled the air, mixing with the smell of sawdust and paint. She found herself spending hours sitting on the old porch, sipping tea and watching them work. But even as she tried to focus on the renovation, something about the place felt different. Strange sounds came from beneath the floor at night. It wasn't the usual creaking of wood or pipes. This was deeper, softer, like a faint knock or whisper that came and went. At first, she ignored it. Old houses always made noises, but the feeling stayed. Sometimes, while sweeping or unpacking boxes, she would pause, sure she had heard something moving just below her. One afternoon, she went down to the basement to check on the foundation. It was dark and cool with a faint earthy smell. The walls were uneven, and the concrete looked cracked in places. She made a mental note to tell the workers to reinforce it. As she stood there, a sudden draft brushed past her neck and she felt a chill. She turned toward the far corner of the room. There, behind a pile of old crates, part of the concrete seemed slightly different, almost newer than the rest. She crouched down and touched it. The surface was smoother, as if someone had repaired it long ago. Her mother used to say that her father had taken care of everything himself when they moved into the house. Maybe he had fixed it, maybe it was nothing. Still, curiosity tugged at her. When she asked the lead worker about the foundation the next day, he nodded thoughtfully. "We'll have to dig near that area anyway," he said. "Looks like there's a small hollow under there. Might as well check it out before we pour the new concrete." She agreed, though part of her wondered if she should just leave it alone. Some things were better left untouched. Days passed and she began to find comfort in the rhythm of renovation. The sound of hammers and drills filled the air, replacing the silence that had once felt so heavy. She painted walls, sanded furniture, and discovered old family photographs tucked between books and boxes. In one photo, her parents stood on that same porch smiling, young and full of hope. Seeing their faces made her both happy and sad. At night, when the workers were gone, she would sit in the living room with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The house, even half-finished, felt alive again. The hum of the wind outside, the faint flicker of candlelight on the walls. It was peaceful. But one evening, while reading through some of her mother's old recipe books, she heard it again, the soft, dull thump beneath the floor. It wasn't a loud sound, but it was there, clear and close. She set down the book and listened. Nothing, just silence. The next morning, she mentioned it to one of the workers. He smiled kindly and said, "Old foundations do that sometimes. You'd be surprised what air pockets can sound like." She laughed and nodded, pretending to agree. Still deep inside, she felt something strange. When the crew began digging around the cracked section a few days later, she stood nearby watching. The men used shovels and small tools to remove chunks of soil and broken stone. The afternoon sun was bright and the air smelled of damp earth. Then one of them stopped suddenly. "Ma'am," he called out, brushing dirt from his gloves. "There's something down here." She stepped closer. In the small hole, half covered in dirt, was a piece of metal glinting in the sunlight. It looked like a corner of a box. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The worker shrugged. Could be old tools, maybe something your dad buried. Want us to pull it out? She hesitated, then nodded. Her heart was racing for reasons she couldn't explain. They worked carefully, removing the soil around the object until the full shape of a small metal box emerged. It was about the size of a shoebox, rusted and wrapped in what looked like the remains of an old cloth. When they finally lifted it out, everyone fell silent. The box was heavier than it looked. She took it in her hands, feeling the chill of the metal. The cloth fell away, revealing a small lock that had long rusted through. Want me to open it for you? One of the men offered. She shook her head. No, I'll do it. Her hands trembled slightly as she found a small screwdriver and pried the lock open. The lid creaked when she lifted it, the hinges protesting after years of being buried. Inside there were several old papers folded neatly, a small leather-bound journal and what looked like a bundle of photographs tied together with string. She stared at them in disbelief. Everything inside was perfectly preserved despite the age. For a long moment she didn't move. The workers stood nearby, unsure if they should leave or stay. Finally, she looked up and smiled faintly. It's okay. You can keep working. I'll take care of this. Once they left, she sat on the porch with the box on her lap. The late afternoon light bathed everything in gold. She ran her fingers over the journal's cover. It was smooth and familiar somehow. She opened it slowly, expecting recipes or notes. But instead she saw her mother's handwriting, delicate and flowing, covering the first page. A wave of emotion washed over her. She hadn't seen that handwriting in years. She turned the pages carefully, scanning the words, but something caught her eye at the bottom of one page. A date. It was written several years before she was born. Her heart skipped a beat. She frowned, turning a few more pages. The entries continued, filled with details she didn't recognize, names, places, and emotions that didn't seem to belong to the family she knew. She looked again at the photographs. Most were old black and white images, showing people she didn't recognize. One photo, however, made her freeze. It was her mother, younger, standing beside a man she had never seen before. They looked close, too close. Her hands trembled as she placed everything back into the box. She didn't know what to think or feel. Maybe these were just old friends, people from before her parents' marriage. But the tone in the journal entries told another story. She sat there until the sun disappeared behind the trees, clutching the box against her chest. The world felt strangely quiet, as if holding its breath. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's handwriting, that unfamiliar man's face, and the smooth patch of foundation where the box had been buried. Something deep inside her told her this wasn't just a random discovery. There was a reason it had been hidden there under the house, beneath the very foundation of her life. And though she didn't yet know it, the secret inside that box was about to change everything she thought she knew about her family and about herself. The night stretched long as she sat in the dimly lit living room, the box resting beside her on the couch. Her fingers lightly traced the edge of the metal, still cold to the touch despite the heat in the room. She could feel a knot tightening in her stomach, a mix of curiosity and unease swirling within her. The photographs inside had unsettled her, and the journal was full of entries that seemed like another life, one she didn't recognize. The quiet of the house surrounded her, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the soft rustle of the wind outside. She knew she should go to bed, try to get some rest, but the urge to dig deeper into the box was stronger than her fatigue. Without another thought, she reached for the bundle of photographs first. They were all black and white, old enough to seem like another century. The faces of strangers smiled back at her, their eyes distant, frozen in time. There were no names written on the back, only the vague outlines of family gatherings and moments that looked happy yet distant. One photo stood out, however. In it, her mother was laughing, young, vibrant, surrounded by a group of people. And beside her stood a man she did not recognize, his arm casually around her mother's shoulder. The way they stood so close, the way they shared a private joke in the photo, left a sinking feeling in her chest. It wasn't just the closeness, it was something else. There was an intimacy there that she had never seen before in her mother's life. She turned the photo over, but there was nothing. No name, no date, just a simple moment frozen in time. Her mind raced. Was this a relative? A childhood friend? There was no mention of him in the family albums, No stories told about this man.
Yet here he was, standing in a picture with her mother as if he belonged. She reached for the journal next, her hands slightly shaking now.
The leather cover felt smooth, worn from age, but still sturdy. She opened it slowly, the pages creaking slightly as she flipped through them. It wasn't until the fourth entry that something truly caught her attention. The handwriting was familiar, but the words were not. I should not be writing this. It feels like I'm betraying everything I know. But I need to record it somewhere so I don't forget. The guilt is eating at me. I don't know how much longer I can keep this secret. It feels like a weight I'm carrying all alone. Her heart skipped a beat. The words felt like a confession, but a confession about what? There were no details, no names, just vague hints of something she wasn't supposed to know. She continued reading. The next few entries were similar. Short, disjointed sentences, almost like the writer couldn't bring herself to complete her thoughts. But as she turned the pages, one word kept appearing again and again: regret. Regret for what? The entries were filled with fragments of emotions, some of them about being in love, some about feeling trapped, and others that were harder to understand. One line stuck with her. Sometimes I wish I had made a different choice, but I cannot undo what has been done, and now I have to live with it. Her breath caught in her throat. The words, though vague, seemed to be about more than just her mother's past. It was as if someone had opened up a window to a part of her life that was hidden from everyone, including her. She closed the journal with a snap, feeling her heart racing. A cold sweat had begun to form on the back of her neck. She placed it carefully on the coffee table, not sure if she should keep going or stop right there. But her curiosity was too strong. She had to know. She had to understand what was buried so deeply within these pages. With trembling hands, she opened the box again and dug through the papers. Beneath the journal, she found a faded letter, yellowed with age, the paper fragile. It had been folded in half and sealed with a broken piece of wax. The seal had been broken long ago, but the letter inside was intact. Her fingers hovered over the paper for a moment. Then she unfolded it carefully, as if afraid it might crumble in her hands. The writing was neat, almost precise, though the ink had faded in places. The first line caught her immediately. To my daughter, when you are old enough to understand. She swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight as she read the rest of the letter. The words were hard to digest. Her mother, the woman who had always been so steady and unwavering, had written this letter with the intention of revealing something she hadn't spoken about for years. I've never told you the truth about your father. And I'm sorry for that. There are things I should have shared with you long ago, but I couldn't. Not then, not when I was afraid. But you deserve to know, and maybe, just maybe, you'll understand why I kept this secret. Her eyes blurred with tears as she read on. The letter spoke of a love that had come and gone, of a time before she was born when her mother had been in a relationship with someone who wasn't her father. The man in the photograph. Her mind reeled. Could it be true? Could this man be the one she had been reading about in the journal? The one who had shared such an intimate moment with her mother in the photo? The letter continued. I never meant to fall in love with him. I never planned for it. But life is never that simple. I made choices I regret, choices that changed everything. And when I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't bring myself to tell him. I didn't want to ruin everything. So I kept it all hidden. I married your father and we built a life together. But I can't erase the past. She could hardly breathe. The words were like a knife, cutting through everything she thought she knew. Her mother had kept this secret her entire life. She had kept her own story locked away in a box, buried beneath the foundation of the house. The letter ended with a final plea. Maybe one day you'll understand why I did this. Maybe one day you'll be able to forgive me. I hope you can. I only wanted what was best for you. Her hands trembled as she set the letter down. Her mind was racing, trying to process the truth she had just uncovered. Her entire life had been built on a lie. The father she had known, the man she had always believed to be hers, might not have been. Her chest tightened with an overwhelming mix of emotions. Betrayal, confusion, sadness. The foundation of her life, the very place she had once found comfort, was now shaking beneath her. She sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the secret pressing down on her. The house, once a place of refuge, now seemed like a stranger's home, cold, unfamiliar. She felt disconnected from everything she had known. She picked up the photograph again, staring at the man beside her mother. Who was he? Why had he been so important? The questions flooded her mind, but there were no answers, not yet. All she had were fragments, a journal, a letter, a photo. And with each new piece, the puzzle grew bigger and more complicated. She couldn't go back to the life she had known before. Not now, not after what she had discovered. But what would she do next? How would she face the truth? For the first time since returning to the house, she didn't feel at home. She felt lost in the very place that had once felt like everything. The house had hidden a secret beneath its foundation, one that had changed her life forever. The days that followed her, discovery felt like an endless blur. She tried to focus on the tasks she had set for herself, finishing the renovation, organizing the house, picking up the pieces of the life she had always known. But the secret she had uncovered had begun to seep into every corner of her mind, haunting her thoughts even when she tried to push it away. Each time she walked through the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was different now. The creaking of the floorboards, the soft hum of the wind outside. It all felt strange, like the house itself had changed along with her. It was as though the walls had become witnesses to the truth, silently holding the weight of the secret she was now burdened with. One morning, as she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring blankly at the newspaper, she felt an overwhelming urge to do something about it. The man in the photograph, the one who stood so close to her mother, was a mystery she couldn't ignore any longer. The journal had mentioned him in passing, but it hadn't provided enough to connect the dots. She needed to know more. With a sigh, she picked up her phone and began typing a message. It felt strange, almost unnatural to be reaching out to someone about something so personal, but the need for answers was too strong to ignore. Hi, I was hoping to speak with you. I found something from my mother's past and I need to know more. Can you help? She hesitated before hitting send. But before she could second-guess herself, she pressed the button. The response came quickly and her heart raced as she read it. I wasn't sure you would ever reach out. Yes, I can help. It's time you knew the truth. The message left her with more questions than answers. Who was this man? How did he know so much about her mother's past? Why had her mother never mentioned him? The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. She spent hours scrolling through old family records, searching for anything that might link this stranger to her life. She found nothing. There were no records, no mentions, no traces of him in any of the family photos or letters. It was as if he had never existed except for that one photo and now this message. Finally, she made up her mind. She would have to meet him. The meeting was set for the following weekend in a small cafe on the edge of town. It was the kind of place that felt cozy and anonymous, where people could sit and talk without being overheard. She arrived early, sitting nervously at a table by the window, her hands fidgeting with the cup of coffee in front of her. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure. The man who would walk through that door would change everything. When he finally arrived, he looked exactly like the man in the photograph. Older, yes, but the same striking eyes, the same confident yet quiet demeanor. He looked around the cafe for a moment, then his gaze landed on her. He walked over to the table, his footsteps slow and deliberate, as if he too was unsure about what was coming. She stood up, feeling her heart race, and extended her hand. I'm glad you agreed to meet with me. He shook her hand, his grip firm but not overly confident. I wasn't sure if you would ever want to know the truth, he said, his voice calm, yet filled with an emotion that was hard to place. They both sat down, the silence between them thick with anticipation. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She could feel the weight of the questions pressing down on her, the things she needed to know. Finally, she broke the silence. You knew my mother, didn't you? He nodded, his expression softening. Yes, I knew her better than anyone once, but that was a long time ago. She leaned forward, her hands clenched in her lap. How? Why didn't she ever tell me about you? His eyes clouded with sadness, and he took a deep breath before speaking. It's complicated. We were young and life had other plans. But your mother. She was always my first love. We had something special, something no one else could understand. But she chose a different path, one that led her to someone else. His words struck a chord within her. She had always known her mother as someone who was strong, someone who had her life together. But hearing this, she realized that there were parts of her mother's life that had been hidden from her, pieces of a past that had never been spoken about. I found a letter, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and a journal. Your name is mentioned in both. He nodded slowly, his gaze not leaving hers. I thought that one day you might find it. I didn't want to hide it from you forever. But your mother, she was afraid. She thought the truth would destroy everything. Destroy everything, she echoed, her mind racing. What do you mean by that? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Your mother was married when she met me. She was already with your father, and when she found out she was pregnant, she was torn. She didn't know what to do. She chose to stay with your father to raise you together, and she kept that part of her life hidden. Her breath caught in her throat. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but the picture was still unclear. So you're saying that my father isn't my real father? He looked down at the table for a moment, then met her eyes. I don't know, but there's a chance that he isn't. Your mother never told me, and I never asked. I wanted to be a part of your life, but she told me she couldn't. She wanted to protect you from the truth. The words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. She felt the ground shift beneath her, as if everything she had known had been suddenly pulled out from under her. The man sitting across from her might be her real father, or maybe not. But what did it mean if he wasn't? So all this time, she began, her voice shaking. My whole life has been a lie? He shook his head quickly. Not a lie. Just a secret. Your mother did what she thought was best given the circumstances. She loved you more than anything. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at the man sitting across from her. He had the same eyes as the man in the photograph, the same smile, gentle yet full of pain. But it wasn't just about the photograph anymore. It was about the life her mother had hidden from her, the life she had kept locked away for so long. I don't know what to believe anymore, she whispered. He leaned forward, his voice soft. I understand. This isn't easy, but you deserve to know the truth. Your mother was a complicated woman, and she made choices that she thought were right at the time, but none of it was about not loving you. She nodded, wiping away a tear. I need time to think. I don't know if I'm ready for this. He stood up, placing a hand on the table. Take all the time you need. But remember, I'm here. If you ever want to know more, I'm not going anywhere. She watched him walk out of the cafe, the door swinging softly behind him. The weight of the conversation hung heavily in the air, and she sat there for a long time, staring out the window. The truth, no matter how much she tried to prepare herself, was still more than she could handle. But the only thing she could do now was face it and figure out what to do next. The days after the meeting felt heavy. She couldn't stop thinking about the man from the cafe and the words he had said. Every sentence replayed in her mind as if she were trying to catch something she had missed. The possibility that he might be her real father was something she couldn't stop thinking about. It wasn't something she could simply forget. It lived in her now, quiet but constant. When she woke up in the morning, the thought was there. When she tried to sleep at night, it followed her like a shadow. She found herself wandering through the house at odd hours, staring at old family photos, wondering how much of what she saw had been built on half-truths. Her mother had always been a private person. There were things she never talked about, certain years, certain people. Growing up, she had never questioned it, but now she wished she had. There were so many things she wanted to ask, and the silence left behind by her mother's passing felt louder than ever. One afternoon, she went to the small shed behind the house where her mother had kept old boxes. She started pulling them down one by one, dust rising in soft clouds. Inside were old records, letters, and keepsakes, some from her childhood, some much older. In one box, she found a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was the same as in the journal, the same careful curves and loops that belonged to her mother. She sat on the floor and began to read. Each letter was addressed to someone named Daniel. Her heart skipped as she read the first one. It was full of warmth and longing, written in a tone that made her mother sound young again, hopeful, full of life. The letter spoke of moments shared, of plans never realized, and of love that was both powerful and uncertain. The last few letters were shorter, sadder. They spoke of endings, of choices that had to be made. One line stood out more than the rest. I cannot keep living two lives. I have to choose the one that gives my child a future, even if it means losing you. She pressed the paper to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. It was clear now. Her mother had made a choice out of fear, out of love, or maybe both. She had built her family around silence, never knowing that one day the truth would come to light. That night she sat on the porch, holding the letters in her lap. The stars above were sharp and bright, the air cool. She thought about her mother, not as the woman who had raised her, but as a woman who had once been young and uncertain, who had loved deeply and carried the weight of regret. For the first time, she didn't feel angry. She felt something closer to understanding, but there was still one thing left undone. She needed to see the man again, the one who might be her father. Not just to ask more questions, but to tell him what she had found. The next day, she sent him a short message. "I found more letters. Can we meet again?" He replied within minutes. "Of course." Same place? When she arrived at the cafe, he was already there, sitting in the same seat as before. He smiled faintly when he saw her. There was something different in his eyes this time. A quiet kindness, maybe even hope. "I didn't think you'd want to see me again," he said softly. "I wasn't sure I would," she admitted, "but I found more of her letters. They were all written to you." His expression changed, and for a moment she thought he might cry. "I thought she burned them," he said quietly. "She told me she would." "She didn't," she replied. "She kept them. All of them. She buried them in this house beneath the foundation. I think she wanted me to find them one day." He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "That sounds like her." She was always torn between what she wanted and what she thought was right. They sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "There's something I need to ask. I need to know if you believe you're my father." He looked at her for a long time, his face unreadable. Then he sighed. "I've asked myself that question for years. When your mother disappeared from my life, I had a feeling she was hiding something, but she never told me. I wanted to find her, to ask her, but I respected her choice. I didn't want to ruin her life." His voice broke slightly. "I loved her enough to let her go." She felt tears sting her eyes again. "You should know she didn't forget you. She wrote about you. Even after everything, she still remembered." He smiled sadly. "That means more than you know." She hesitated, then reached into her bag and took out one of the letters. "Here," she said, sliding it across the table. "I think this one was meant for you." He looked down at the letter for a long time before opening it. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the fragile paper. As he read, his face softened, his eyes wet with tears. When he finally looked up, he said, "This was written after she left. She said she hoped I'd understand why she had to do it. And I do now." She didn't know what to say. The air between them was filled with unspoken emotion. Grief, love, forgiveness, all tangled together. After a while, he said, "You don't owe me anything. Whether I'm your father or not doesn't matter. What matters is that you know who she was. She was a good woman who tried to do what she thought was right." "I want to know," she said quietly. "I need to know for sure," he nodded. "Then we'll find out. But whatever the answer is, I hope it brings you peace." They agreed to meet again once they had the results of a simple DNA test. It would take a few weeks, maybe longer. Until then, she tried to live her life as normally as she could, but normal was hard to find. Every time she looked in the mirror, she wondered whose eyes looked back at her. Every time she passed the foundation of the house, she felt the weight of what she had discovered buried deep beneath it. The house no longer felt like just a home. It was part of her story, one that had started long before she was born. During those weeks, she thought a lot about her mother. She replayed memories she hadn't thought about in years. Her mother's laughter, the way she used to hum while cooking, the small gestures of love that had filled her childhood. It all made sense now. The moments of distance, the quiet sadness that had sometimes flickered behind her mother's smile. She began to forgive her, slowly. It didn't happen all at once, but each time she looked at the letters, each time she thought about the life her mother had led, she felt a little less anger and a little more understanding. Finally, the day came when the results arrived. Her heart pounded as she held the envelope in her hands. The man waited with her on the porch, his expression calm but tense. "Whatever it says," he told her, "we'll face it together." She nodded and took a deep breath before tearing the envelope open. The paper inside was small, but the words printed on it were clear. She read it once, then again, unable to speak. He watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. Then she looked up at him, her voice trembling. "It's you." For a long moment he said nothing. Then a tear rolled down his cheek, and he reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. She smiled through her tears. "You don't have to say anything." They sat there for a while, not speaking, just letting the truth settle between them. There was sadness, yes, but also peace. The truth had been buried for so long, but now it was finally free. That night, when she returned home, she walked to the spot near the foundation where the box had been found. She placed a single candle there and lit it, watching the flame flicker in the soft breeze. The secret that had once hidden beneath the ground had finally come to light. It had shaken her, changed her, and even broken her a little, but it had also brought her closer to understanding her mother's heart. She whispered softly into the night, "I understand now." And for the first time since finding that box, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The morning light spilled gently through the windows, touching the wooden floor with a soft glow. The house felt different now, not just because of the new paint or the repaired walls, but because the air inside seemed lighter, calmer. The weight that had hung over it for weeks was gone. She stood by the window holding a cup of tea between her hands, looking out at the old oak tree in the yard. The leaves were turning golden, a sign that autumn had arrived. The air carried a faint chill, the kind that made her want to wrap herself in a blanket and sit quietly with her thoughts. It had been a few weeks since she learned the truth. The DNA test had confirmed what her heart had already begun to accept. The man she had met at the cafe was her real father. The shock of it had passed, replaced by something quieter, more peaceful. She had met with him several times since then. Their conversations were long, sometimes filled with laughter, sometimes with silence. He told her stories about her mother that she had never heard before, how they met, how they used to walk along the lake in the evenings, how her mother had dreams of traveling but stayed behind to build a family instead. Each story added another layer to her understanding of who her mother had been, not just a parent but a person, full of love, fear, and complicated choices. Sometimes when she thought about everything that had happened, she still felt a pang of sadness. The secret had changed her life, yes, but it had also shown her something she would never have seen otherwise: the strength of forgiveness. The man, her father, visited often. The first few times were awkward, both of them unsure what to say or how to act. But slowly the uneasiness faded. They would sit on the porch, sharing stories about their lives, sometimes in comfortable silence. One evening, as the sun began to set, he looked out across the field and said softly, "You remind me so much of her, not just in how you look, but in how you think." She had that same way of seeing the world, quiet but strong. She smiled, her heart tightening a little. "I wish I had known her like you did," she said. He nodded. "In a way you do. You carry parts of her with you every day." She didn't say anything after that. She just sat there watching the sun sink lower, thinking about the strange, beautiful way life worked. In the weeks that followed, she threw herself into finishing the renovation. The workers had completed most of the repairs and the house looked almost new. The foundation, once cracked and unstable, was now strong again. It felt symbolic somehow, as if fixing the house had mirrored her own process of healing. When the last coat of paint was dry and the tools were packed away, she walked through each room slowly. The kitchen smelled faintly of fresh wood and lemon polish. The living room, once filled with dust and boxes, now glowed with soft light. In her parents' old room, she placed a framed photo of her mother on the bedside table. It wasn't the photo of her mother alone that she had grown up seeing, but the one she had found in the buried box, the one where her mother stood beside the man who was now part of her life again. For a long time she had thought that picture represented betrayal, but now she saw it differently. It wasn't a reminder of lies, it was a piece of truth, a piece of love that had survived in silence. She touched the frame gently and whispered, "I think I finally understand." That night she couldn't sleep. The air was cool and the moonlight spilled through the curtains. She got up and walked outside, her bare feet brushing against the cold grass. She stopped near the spot where the metal box had been buried. The ground looked ordinary now, just soil and scattered leaves, but she could still feel the energy of what had been there. It was strange how something so small, just a box filled with papers and memories, could hold so much power. She sat down on the grass and closed her eyes. Memories came flooding back. Her mother's voice calling her in for dinner, her father laughing as he fixed the old porch steps, the sound of the wind through the trees. All of it blended together into something bittersweet but beautiful. After a while, she whispered softly into the cool night air, "Thank you for keeping the truth safe. I know it wasn't easy." The next morning, she decided to write, not for anyone else but for herself. She found an old notebook and began to fill the pages with her story. Not just what she had discovered, but what she had felt through it all. She wrote about finding the box, reading the letters, meeting the man who had been missing from her life, and learning to forgive the mother who had kept the secret. The words came easily, flowing like a quiet river. Writing them down helped her understand even more. Weeks passed. Life began to settle into something that felt normal again, though not the same kind of normal she had known before. This was a new kind, one that carried truth instead of questions. One afternoon, her father came by with an old wooden chair he had repaired himself. "It was your mother's favorite," he said with a smile. "I found it in my garage, thought it should come home." She ran her fingers along the armrest. The wood was smooth, polished, and familiar. "Thank you," she said softly. He helped her set it on the porch. They both sat for a while, not saying much, just listening to the sounds of the world around them, the chirping of crickets, the soft rustle of the trees. Finally, he spoke. "You know, your mother used to say this house had a soul. She said it remembered things." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why it kept the secret so long." He laughed, a deep, warm laugh that made her smile too. "Maybe so." As the evening turned to night, they talked about the future. They talked about simple things. Gardening, painting the fence, maybe even taking a short trip together someday. It felt good to plan, to think about what came next. Later, after he left, she stayed outside watching the stars appear one by one. The night air was still and peaceful. She thought about everything that had happened, everything that had changed. She realized that despite the pain and confusion, she was grateful for the truth. The secret buried beneath the foundation hadn't destroyed her. It had rebuilt her. It had shown her the strength of love, the importance of forgiveness, and the beauty of second chances. The next morning, she placed a small wooden box near the edge of the porch. Inside, she put a copy of the letters, a photograph, and a short note she had written herself. The note said, "To whoever finds this one day, know that the truth may hurt, but it will also heal. This house holds more than memories. It holds lessons. Every wall, every stone, every corner carries a story of love, loss, and forgiveness. Don't be afraid to uncover yours." She buried the box carefully, covering it with soft soil and a small flat stone. She didn't do it to hide anything. She did it as a way of honoring the past, a quiet promise that the story would live on. When she stood up, she felt lighter. The sun had just risen, painting the world in shades of gold and pink. The wind carried the scent of earth and pine, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because everything finally made sense. The secret beneath the foundation had once shaken her world. It had broken her heart, tested her strength, and made her question everything she knew. But now it had become the reason she could stand tall again. The house stood strong and still, the morning light reflecting softly off its windows. She turned toward it, whispering, "We're both new now." And with that, she walked back inside, not as the same person who had once feared the truth, but as someone who had faced it, embraced it, and built something beautiful from it. The past was no longer a shadow beneath the foundation. It was part of the walls, the floors, the very air she breathed. It was home,